There he is. Look at this place. Y'all trying to move in or something? Actually, we do. We live here now.
Marcus Reynolds was 41 years old, and until that Saturday afternoon, he thought his marriage was simply under pressure, not quietly falling apart. He had blamed the distance on long workdays. The unanswered texts, stress. The short conversations over dinner, exhaustion. The missing affection, maybe they were just growing older together. After 17 years of marriage, Marcus believed every relationship had seasons. He never imagined his wife had already entered a completely different season without him. And he certainly never imagined her entire family would help her rewrite his future inside the very house he had spent 11 years building. Looking back now, Marcus often said there had been hundreds of warning signs. He just mistook love for patience. And patience can sometimes become permission. Marcus Reynolds was a respected civil engineer in Atlanta, Georgia. For nearly 20 years, he had designed roads, schools, hospitals, and commercial buildings throughout the city. His co-workers trusted him. His church admired him. His neighbors respected him. People often joked that Marcus could solve almost any problem with enough planning and hard work. He wasn't flashy. He drove a 5-year-old black Lexus SUV. He wore the same silver watch he'd bought after paying off his student loans. He believed money should create security, not attention. By 41, Marcus had achieved everything he'd dreamed about as a young man. He had built a successful engineering consulting firm from the ground up. He had paid cash for the family's forever home after years of saving. He had invested wisely enough that college tuition for both of his children was already fully funded. He quietly helped his widowed mother every month. He even helped his wife's younger brother start a landscaping business when no bank would approve the loan. Marcus never kept score, because family wasn't supposed to be transactional. Family was supposed to be forever. Some years earlier, when Marcus met Danielle Brooks at a community charity fundraiser, she'd been the brightest person in the room. She laughed with her whole heart. She teased him because he wore a tie to an outdoor barbecue. "You look like you're interviewing to marry somebody's grandmother," she joked. Marcus laughed so hard he nearly spilled his lemonade. That became their first inside joke. Over the years, they'd built dozens more. Friday taco nights, Sunday afternoon walks through Piedmont Park, road trips where Danielle insisted on singing terribly just to make him laugh. They celebrated promotions with homemade dinners instead of expensive restaurants. Every Christmas Eve, they wrapped presents while watching old family movies. Every anniversary, Marcus wrote her a handwritten letter, not because she asked, because she deserved to know how much she meant to him. At least, that's what he believed. If you're enjoying stories about family, betrayal, marriage, and unforgettable moments of justice, take a second to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We bring you powerful stories every week that remind us why character always matters more than appearances. Breen, the changes began so gradually they almost felt invisible. Danielle started spending more weekends with her parents. Her phone never seemed to leave her hand. She smiled less. She answered questions with one-word replies. "Dinner's ready. I'm tired. We'll talk later." Marcus noticed. He simply didn't accuse. Love, he'd always believed, required trust before suspicion. When she said she was helping her mother through health issues, he believed her. When she stayed overnight because Dad needed someone around, Marcus packed snacks for her drive. When she missed their anniversary dinner because her sister supposedly had an emergency, Marcus reheated the food. Alone. He never imagined she'd spent that evening laughing at a luxury restaurant less than 20 minutes away. Fuck. The biggest surprise of Marcus's life arrived 3 months later. His company landed a massive municipal infrastructure contract. The deal nearly doubled the firm's value overnight. His longtime friend and business partner clapped him on the shoulder. "You finally did it." Marcus smiled. "No," he replied. "We finally did it." That was Marcus. Success always belonged to everyone else first. Thuk. To celebrate, Marcus purchased a stunning modern home in an upscale Atlanta neighborhood. Floor-to-ceiling windows, open-concept living spaces, a backyard overlooking a small lake. It wasn't about showing off. It was about finally giving his family the peaceful home they'd always dreamed about. Danielle smiled when she first saw it. "It's beautiful." But Marcus noticed something strange. She wasn't excited. She looked calculating. He dismissed the feeling. 3 weeks later, they hosted a housewarming party. Neighbors, church friends, co-workers, close relatives. The home buzzed with music, laughter, and congratulations. Marcus stood near the kitchen island, holding a glass of sparkling cider while thanking guests. Everything felt perfect. Until the front door opened again. Danielle's parents walked inside. Behind them came her younger sister, then her brother, then 2 cousins. Marcus smiled. Glad you all could make it. But his smile faded. Every one of them rolled full-sized suitcases, large duffel bags, storage bins, garment bags, even cardboard boxes. Marcus blinked. Maybe they were bringing gifts. Though, who brought luggage to a housewarming? Danielle walked toward them immediately. Far more excited than she'd been all afternoon. Her mother hugged her tightly. Her father looked around the house with obvious satisfaction. Her brother wheeled 2 massive suitcases into the foyer. Nobody asked permission. Nobody hesitated. Marcus walked over with a polite smile. Vacation after the party? Everyone laughed. Except Danielle. She avoided his eyes. Something twisted in Marcus's stomach. Sohn, her father, Harold Brooks, stepped forward wearing a beige blazer and the confident grin Marcus had seen only a handful of times before. Mostly whenever Harold believed he'd outsmarted someone. He slowly looked around the home. Then looked Marcus directly in the eyes. We've decided, he said. This house is big enough for everybody. Marcus frowned. I'm sorry? Harold smiled wider. We live here now. Silence. Even the music suddenly seemed quieter. Marcus laughed awkwardly. Good one. Nobody else laughed. Danielle finally spoke. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd overreact. Marcus stared at her. Tell me what? My parents sold their house. My brother's apartment lease ended. My sister needed a fresh start. So, she shrugged casually. We all agreed moving here made the most sense. Marcus genuinely thought he had misunderstood English. You, he whispered, all agreed? Danielle nodded. Yes. Marcus looked around. Every suitcase, every smiling face, every confident expression. Not one person looked uncertain. They expected him to welcome them. Sigh. Church friends standing nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. His co-worker quietly lowered his drink. The room had become painfully still. Marcus forced himself to remain calm. You mean? He asked carefully. For the weekend? Danielle actually sighed. No, Marcus. My family lives here now. Her younger brother grinned. I already called the downstairs bedroom. One cousin laughed. I'm taking the guest suite. Marcus felt his heartbeat echo inside his ears. Nobody had asked. Nobody had discussed this. His own house. His own mortgage. His own dream. Apparently, everyone else had already made decisions. Without him. Harold walked toward the staircase. I'll use the upstairs office. Marcus stepped in front of him. No. Harold stopped. What do you mean, no? I mean, Marcus answered quietly. You're not taking my office. Harold chuckled. You'll get used to sharing. Danielle folded her arms. Marcus, don't embarrass me. That sentence hit harder than anything else. Don't embarrass me. Not, I'm sorry. Not, we should have discussed this. Instead, don't embarrass me. In his own home. So, Marcus looked around the room. Dozens of guests watched silently. Some looked horrified. Others simply confused. His son, 16-year-old Caleb, stared between both parents in disbelief. His 12-year-old daughter, Ava, quietly stepped beside Marcus and held his hand. Dad? She whispered. What's happening? Marcus squeezed her hand gently. I don't know. And that was the most painful truth he'd spoken in years. He truly didn't know. He no longer recognized the woman standing across from him. Thuck. Danielle finally broke the silence. You've always talked about family helping family. Marcus nodded slowly. I have. So why is this different? Marcus looked directly into her eyes. Because helping, he replied, is something people ask for. Taking over someone's home without asking isn't help. It's entitlement. Her brother rolled his eyes dramatically. Man, you're making this awkward. Marcus looked at him calmly. No? You did that when you packed your suitcase. The room became so quiet, The refrigerator humming in the kitchen suddenly sounded loud. Harold crossed his arms. "You're seriously choosing a house over family?" Marcus answered almost immediately. "No. I'm choosing respect." Harold scoffed. "Same thing." Marcus shook his head. "No. They're completely different." sighed Danielle, suddenly raised her voice. "This is my house too." Marcus nodded. "You're absolutely right. It is. And because it's our house," he emphasized the word our, "both homeowners should have agreed before inviting permanent residents." Danielle's expression hardened. "I don't need permission to help my family." Marcus quietly replied, "You also don't get permission to volunteer my life." Fourth. The argument had now become impossible to ignore. Guests awkwardly gathered near the living room. No one wanted to leave. No one wanted to watch. Yet everyone remained frozen. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes on him. He had never been humiliated like this. Not because people disagreed with him, but because the woman he loved had planned an entire new life, without including him in it. He took one slow breath, then another. Years of leading engineering teams had taught him one valuable lesson. Never make major decisions while emotions are running the meeting. So instead of yelling, instead of insulting anyone, Marcus calmly reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made one very short phone call. "Good afternoon, Angela," a warm voice answered. "Congratulations on the new house, Marcus." "Thank you. I need a favor." "What happened?" Marcus glanced around his crowded living room, then quietly said, "I need you to come over." "As my attorney." The smile disappeared from Danielle's face, and for the very first time that afternoon, someone in the Brooks family looked genuinely nervous. Attorney Angela Whitmore arrived 23 minutes later. She didn't rush through the front door. She didn't raise her voice. She simply walked into the living room carrying a leather portfolio, greeted Marcus with a nod, and quietly took in the scene. Suitcases lined the entryway. Boxes sat against freshly painted walls. Guests stood in uncomfortable silence. Danielle's family looked as though they had already unpacked in their minds. Angela finally spoke. "Marcus, would you mind explaining why I'm here?" Marcus kept his composure. "My wife invited 6 additional adults to permanently move into our home without my knowledge or consent." Angela looked toward Danielle. "Is that accurate?" Danielle folded her arms. "It's our home." Angela nodded. "It is." She paused. "But that's not what I asked." Another silence. Finally Danielle admitted, "Yes." Angela turned back to Marcus. "I understand." Then she addressed everyone in the room. "I'd like to clarify something before this goes any further." Her calm voice carried across the house. "Marriage gives both spouses equal dignity. It does not give either spouse the authority to unilaterally move additional adults into a jointly occupied marital home over the clear objection of the other." Harold scoffed. "She's trying to intimidate us." Angela smiled politely. "No, sir. I'm explaining reality." Marcus still hadn't raised his voice. He simply watched. For the first time all afternoon, someone else was saying exactly what he'd been trying to express. This wasn't about generosity. It wasn't about money. It was about respect. Angela continued, "If everyone leaves peacefully today, this remains a family disagreement. If not," she closed her folder, "it becomes a legal matter that none of you are likely to enjoy." Danielle's brother laughed. "She's bluffing." Angela reached into her briefcase. "I rarely do." She handed Marcus a folder. Inside were copies of the home's ownership documents and occupancy agreements that had been prepared during closing. Marcus hadn't looked at them since signing. Angela had. She always read everything. Harold stepped closer. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying," Angela replied, "that you were never invited to reside here. And now you've been informed that you are not welcome to do so." She looked directly at him. "The appropriate response is to gather your belongings and leave." The room became still again. Danielle stared at Marcus as though waiting for him to change his mind. He didn't. "Sit." Her mother spoke for the first time. "Marcus, we're family." Marcus nodded slowly. "I thought we were." She frowned. "What does that mean?" He took a deep breath. "For 11 years. I paid for Thanksgiving dinners. I fixed Harold's roof. I helped Darren start his business. I drove your sister to chemotherapy appointments. I never asked for anything in return." He looked around the room. "But today, You all decided my opinion didn't matter. His voice remained steady. You didn't come asking. You arrived announcing. And that's the difference. Several guests quietly nodded. Danielle suddenly burst into tears. You would really throw my family out? Marcus looked at her with heartbreaking disappointment. No, I refuse to let them move in. Those aren't the same thing. She shook her head. They have nowhere else to go. Marcus blinked. They sold their house. That wasn't an emergency. That was a choice. And somehow, he looked around. Everyone expected me to pay for that choice. To Harold's confidence finally began to crack. He looked at Danielle. You said he'd eventually accept it. Marcus slowly turned toward his wife. You knew. She couldn't answer. You told them I'd give in? Her silence answered everything. The realization hit Marcus harder than any insult. This wasn't a spontaneous misunderstanding. It had been planned, discussed, scheduled. Suitcases packed, homes sold. Without one conversation with him, one of Danielle's cousins quietly picked up her luggage. I think we should go. Harold glared at her. Sit down. She shook her head. No. She looked at Marcus. I'm sorry. We were told you had already agreed. Marcus looked surprised. You were? She nodded. Danielle said you wanted everybody together. The living room exploded into whispers. Another cousin frowned. That's what we were told too. Even Danielle's younger sister looked confused. I thought this was your idea. Danielle's face lost all color. Marcus realized something important. Not everyone had intended to deceive him. Some had been deceived too. Harold stared at his daughter. You told us he suggested this. She looked away. I thought you'd come around. You thought wrong, Marcus said quietly. Years of buried frustration suddenly surfaced. I've come around every time. When your brother borrowed money. When your parents needed repairs. When family vacations somehow became my bill. When birthdays somehow became my responsibility. I never complained. Because I believed kindness builds families. He swallowed hard. But kindness without boundaries builds entitlement. No one interrupted him. Pi. His son Caleb finally spoke. Dad. Marcus turned. Caleb's eyes were wet. I'm sorry. Marcus frowned. For what? I knew Mom was meeting with Grandpa. I thought they were planning a surprise. Marcus hugged his son. You don't owe me an apology. You were trying to trust your parents. 12-year-old Ava quietly walked over to Danielle. Mom, Danielle knelt. Ava asked the simplest question in the room. Why didn't you ask Dad first? Danielle opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because there wasn't an answer that a 12-year-old or anyone else could accept. Within 30 minutes, the celebration looked completely different. Suitcases rolled back toward the front door. Boxes disappeared. Guests quietly helped carry luggage outside. No one argued anymore. The confidence that had filled the room earlier had dissolved into embarrassment. Harold paused before leaving. He looked at Marcus. I still think you're making a mistake. Marcus nodded respectfully. Maybe. But it'll be my mistake. Harold didn't respond. He simply walked outside. One by one, every suitcase left the house. When the last vehicle pulled away, the silence inside felt overwhelming. The balloons still floated. The food remained untouched. Music still played softly through ceiling speakers. But the marriage Marcus thought he had was gone. Danielle sat on the couch crying. I never wanted this. Marcus sat across from her. Then why did you plan it? She finally admitted the truth. My parents kept saying that if we had this much space, it was selfish not to share. They said a good daughter takes care of her family. I didn't know how to tell them no. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand that. She looked hopeful. Really? Yes? I understand being pressured. I don't understand sacrificing your husband to avoid disappointing someone else. The following weeks were painful. Danielle moved into the guest bedroom. Not because Marcus demanded it. Because neither of them knew how to pretend everything was normal. They began marriage counseling. Some sessions ended in tears. Others ended in silence. The counselor eventually asked Danielle a difficult question. When did you stop seeing Marcus as your partner and start seeing him as a resource? Danielle cried for nearly 10 minutes before answering. I don't know. But eventually, she did know. Years of trying to please everyone had quietly turned Marcus into the person expected to absorb every sacrifice. She had mistaken his generosity for endless capacity. Harold called several times. Marcus answered politely every time. But his boundaries never changed. Family dinners became invitations, not obligations. Financial help became rare. Advice remained free. Checks did not. To Marcus's surprise, some relationships actually improved. People respected limits they had never been given before. Others disappeared completely. Their absence answered questions words never could. Nearly a year later, Marcus and Danielle hosted another gathering. This time there were no suitcases, only laughter, only invited guests, only people who respected the home they entered. Harold and his wife attended as well. Age and humility had softened him. As everyone prepared to leave, Harold stopped Marcus at the front door. "I owe you something." Marcus smiled. "You don't owe me money." Harold chuckled. "No, I owe you an apology." Marcus waited. "I spent years teaching my children that family means never hearing the word no. I was wrong." Marcus extended his hand. Harold ignored it. Instead, he embraced him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't magical. It was simply honest. Sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is enough. Months later, Marcus stood on the back patio, watching the sunset reflect across the lake behind the house. Danielle walked beside him. "I've been thinking." He smiled. "That's usually dangerous." She laughed for the first time in what felt like years. "I'm serious. I used to think love meant never disappointing my parents." She slipped her hand into his. "Now I know. Love sometimes means disappointing people who are asking you to betray the person standing beside you." Marcus squeezed her hand. "And respect?" She smiled. "Respect means discussing life-changing decisions before making them." He nodded. "That's the marriage I always wanted." Some people in their neighborhood still remembered the famous housewarming party. Some remembered the awkward silence. Others remembered the rolling suitcases. Most remembered something else. A man who refused to yell. A husband who chose dignity over humiliation. Someone who proved that setting boundaries isn't cruelty. It's self-respect. Marcus often reflected on that day and realized something important. The greatest betrayal wasn't that people tried to move into his home. The greatest betrayal was believing his kindness meant he had no right to say no. Once he learned that a boundary could exist alongside love, everything changed. Because healthy families aren't built on guilt. They're built on honesty. And the strongest homes aren't protected by locks on the doors. They're protected by mutual respect between the people who live inside them.